Mention Sue Gordon's name in national security circles and people will come out of the woodworks to sing her praises. With over 30 years in public service roles, she includes among her many accomplishments advising the president on intelligence matters as a national senior ranking official in the intelligence community. Today, she leads Gordon Ventures and advises leading corporations on their own strategies. Today, she's here to tell us how she balanced it all as a mother of two. Plus, she'll get into her time in the CIA during the 2012 Benghazi attacks, where the realization came that secrets just aren't what they used to be. My colleague Lauren Bedula, the managing director at Beacon Global Strategies and the co-host of the Building the Base podcast, is here to help moderate this conversation. I'm Dr. Kathleen McInnis, and this is Smart Women, Smart Power.
This is Smart Women, Smart Power, a podcast that features conversations with some of the world's most powerful women.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sue. We're just delighted to have you here today.
Oh, this is the best. Being with smart women. I have a friend who says that smart is my crack, and so I'm totally delighted to be here.
I am totally stealing that. That's awesome.
And we've so been looking forward to this. And Sue, your story is one of my favorite stories, as you hear me say all the time. So we thought we'd start there. Can you tell our listeners, how'd you end up here? What drew you to national security? Where did it all begin?
So, I don't know, happenstance. I wish I were one of those people who said, oh, I had a vision of what I wanted to be, and I just ruthlessly pursued it. No, I'm like, happy, right? And I think you just point at something and then you pursue it as hard as you can, and that's really been the story of my career. But I was a third kid of a naval officer. I think if that's your family history, then you kind of grow up with at least two things. One is you're supposed to do your best, and you're supposed to give something to the cause. So that's kind of my foundation, just an experience you have when you drive across country infinite times every year and a half, whether you needed to, not in a car, listening to stories about national service. It's just kind of in there. I went to Duke thinking that I was going to be a world-famous marine biologist. Duke had a marine science consortium on the East Coast, and I thought this was great. ACC, sports school, great academic reputation, and I can become the new Jacques Cousteau. Unfortunately, you had to go there in the spring semester, and I ended up playing basketball, and I was never available in the spring semester.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there you go.
So I pursued my love of living systems, and I became I majored in biomechanics, and as I was approaching graduating, I thought, well, should I go get a PhD or should I go to get a degree in law? Because I love arguing. I always wanted to say it rings around you logically. But I thought that was just too wide a bandwidth. And so CIA was hiring on campus. They were interviewing on campus. And I thought, well, that sounds national servicey. And Stan Turner was in the Navy before he became the director of CIA. So this feels like kismet. And so
it's vibes.
And so I applied and got hired to be an analyst of Soviet biological warfare, which never manifested because it was a time of downturn and my job was gone before I got there. But I just had an opportunity to, just pursue purpose and curiosity for a career.
Wow. What kept you at the agency and in the IC more broadly over the years?
Yeah, so one of the things I say about the CIA, and this is going to sound funny for this topic, it's the CIA that I joined was a lot like playing pickup basketball with guys. So if you play with women, we're all about shared purpose, sharing the ball, a shared outcome. When you play pickup basketball with guys, if you don't do something with the ball, you're not going to get the ball again.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So in the CIA, there were two really wonderful things. One is you're expected to do something with every job you have.
Yeah.
And the far more important part is the organization allows you to do something. Okay. Right? So it's got a culture that says, not only should you, but we're going to allow you. And so what kept me there was I got a chance to do a series of jobs, none of which I was prepared for, each of which I pursued as hard as I can, because I think you have to own your space.
Yeah.
And each time I did that, it turned into another opportunity. So I started out analyzing Soviet spacecraft, and then we were building a new collector that depended on understanding Soviet spacecraft. So I went over to build things. And then I had a boss that needed to do something different, and so he put me on that task. And it just kind of, my career became, if you need someone to do something, you hire Sue.
Get it done, Sue.
Yeah, and I think probably because I had the ability and belief that I was supposed to both work to acquire the knowledge that the job required, and then apply that knowledge in the job that I had. And so if you don't believe you're stuck with the knowledge you have,
Yeah.
and you work really hard, and I worked really hard, you can, in fact, deliver over and over and over again.
What, as you think about the changes and the evolution of the IC over the span of your involvement, engagement, leadership of that world, what are the top 2 or 3 things that strike you as having changed over that period that you think are most profound or impactful for the people working there?
Yeah, so the thing that I don't think has changed, and I think is a really lovely baseline,
Yeah.
is one, just like every federal employee, you swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that is a really good foundational place.
Yes.
Right? You say what you will, political views that you might have. If that's the group of people you come to work with every day, you're coming to work with a pretty good set of folks. And I think that's a foundation. And then the second is intelligence is you are free to just pursue the truth as hard as you can, because you are not burdened with having to set policy.
Right.
Right? So that means you believe that you're just supposed to see the world as it is. And then you're supposed to represent that to the people that are making policy decisions so that they can make the best without judging whether they're making the right policy decision or not. And I think those are a couple really interesting foundational pieces. What I walked into in 1980 was, probably didn't know it was the end of the Cold War, but kind of the end of the Cold War, so kind of Cold War mentality. My first bosses were the Wizards of Langley, the people who had first imagined that we can move beyond human collection and win the technical collection. And so my first line supervisors were there when the problem first presented itself and imparted on the pups that sense of mission.
Wow.
Right, so you never confuse. So when you say, mission, it was something that wasn't a bumper sticker, but in fact was what we felt, because it's what we were taught, because the leaders that were most important to anybody, your first line supervisors, they were there.
Yeah.
And I think that has changed over time. The community still has the same mission, but that kind of passing from one generation of leader to the next, from one that was there in the middle of the fight, has diminished a bit. And so you get more questioning and discontent, and then you put on top of it the political environment we have now, and more individuals thinking, well, maybe I need to do something outside of the system to make sure that our mission is done, whether that's unauthorized disclosure or something. So I think that's one of the things that's changed.
Sure.
And then the second is, and it kind of happened over time, is in 1980 we did one thing, and that was the former Soviet Union. In fact, in the Office of Scientific and Weapons Research, where I joined, there were about 780 people. 779 of them did the former Soviet Union. Wow. I'm being a little hyperbolic. And one did China, and the rest of the world. And so Richard Martin, thank God you were there holding the line, but we were there. But it meant that the whole system understood how it all played together.
Yeah.
Right? So it didn't matter if you were over here in a different office doing something small. The system understood how it all played together.
Right.
When proliferation happens, we go poof, and we come bigger, and we're expected to deliver the same product on the whole of the world, and we don't have that expertise, but we still deliver it, and our collectors aren't doing it. And then terrorism manifests. And we haven't really developed a new methodology for that, so we're kind of using the old, where's the foundation, how do you tie it, and then now you have shift to great power competition.
Right.
So I think you have a bit of dilution of how it all works together. That isn't a dilution of talent, that isn't a dilution of effort, but it does mean as the mission expanded exponentially, people are doing jobs both without the foundation to support with their pieces or the understanding of how it all puts together. And I think you see that a bit.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. So fast forward 2012.
Okay.
Benghazi.
Yep.
For our listeners, can you just frame up what happened? And I know for today we were going to dig into the decisions made.
So we'll take a particular part. So what's interesting is 2012, we're a decade after 9/11. You know how I said I became the person you hired if you needed something done, and I never got a job I knew how to do.
It makes it fun.
Details. Sporty. So I'm the director of support, and the director of support at the CIA is pretty much half the agency works for, and you're responsible for all the food, shelter, clothing, what I call all the work that when quietly done allows mission to happen. So it's finance, logistics, facilities, security, whatever. So I'm the director of support. 2012, Dave Petraeus is the director, Michael Morrell is the deputy director. I don't know that we would have called it on the day Benghazi happened that Arab Spring was underway, but Arab Spring was underway, but it's in its nascent stages, so you don't really know it. So we're sitting at noon that day, and someone comes in and says they've gone over the wall in Cairo. And we're like, wait, what? Right? It was just kind of the, what?
Right.
And so we all scatter, and it turns out that they did. But it was okay because the embassy in Cairo is an Inman Standard building. It's got Marine security guards as well. And it was quelled pretty quickly.
Right.
So we think so we think we're okay. At 6 o'clock that evening, I get a call from Pat Kennedy at State, and he says, Sue, we've lost Chris, the ambassador, from our temporary mission facility in Benghazi, State Departments. Can your guys, we were at a different location, can your guys help us out?
Wow.
And the answer is, of course we can, and so we rally and those things happen. And by 10 o'clock, we've got them. I mean, there's a lot of details. By 10 o'clock, we've got them, and we get them back, and now we're just waiting to have our guys come in and take our guys out of our facility. And so I go home, right? We've got it all set. We think it's all there. And I live 15 minutes away. By the time I pulled in my driveway, I get another call from Pat, and he said, Sue, you've lost some. And our facility was under attack. We lost a couple of my security guys, and the game was back on, right? So that was the start of it. And
oh my God.
For the listener, what you all know of Benghazi is the brouhaha that happened around whose fault it was, who didn't respond, was it a political event, were we too worried about terrorism, did the Obama administration want something else to happen, was Hillary Clinton forthcoming as a Secretary of State? That's what everyone hears.
Yeah.
My story of Benghazi is, out of the blue, a group of people came on sovereign U.S. territory with the intent to do us harm, and despite heroic efforts, lives were lost.
Right.
It happened over a minute. It happened over the hours I said. But that was not the story that happened, right? So that's what we have. Well, if you in the news, the story went crazy, but there was a storyline that said CIA didn't respond in time to the call.
Right.
And it was getting louder and louder. And so Dave Petraeus, former CENTCOM commander, said, I'm first to the truth. We're going to tell them what really happened because we have to stop this.
Yeah.
That is not what the CIA does.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm the director of support. I've got security working for me, and so I go trundling to this meeting and I say, yeah, no. We don't give oxygen to fire.
Yeah.
Right.
We allow people to say things about us because we have security equities globally to protect.
Yeah.
So
Nice. Maybe, what was the reaction?
So I felt like Pete Longstreet going to tell General Lee that Pickett's charge wasn't going to work. So it was actually General Petraeus was overseas and Michael Morrell was running what we were going to do, and he said, well, Sue, what we're going to do is we're going to call 20 reporters in, and we're going to tell them exactly what happened. And I said, you can't. He said, and yet we are. So I go trundling back to my team, and my security team comes, and then they give me more details about why exactly this is a bad idea. And again, and this is a very valid argument, in that our global equities would be compromised by revealing this. This is why, people. We can talk about whether we classify too much or too little, but foundationally why we classify things is basically to protect either information or human or equities so that we can do them again, and so that people who have thrown their lots in with us done it. So I go trooping back in armed with a better argument. I said, Michael, we just can't do it.
Yeah.
And he said, and yet we are.
Wow.
So now I've made 2 runs at it, and tomorrow's when the meeting is.
Wow.
So next morning I come in, my team again meets in my office one more time into the breach, because this is truth to power, and I'm a truth to power gal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that I just haven't explained my argument well enough, which is just a really great lesson that everyone should take out of this. And I go and I tell Michael, and he said, Sue, we're doing it. I know you know Dave Ignatius. He's sitting here, and you're going to join us for the meeting.
Wow.
And we did, and we told exactly what happened to 20 national security reporters. And the first one who reported was Suzanne Kelly of the Cipher Brief, who then was CNN's national security advisor. And she told the story of our response, honestly, and exactly as we told it. And you know what happened to the story in the newspaper, that CIA hadn't responded? It went away.
Right.
Now, the other brouhaha, because this was the first big politicization kind of charge of the modern intelligence era, that persisted. But man, that incident for me was really transformative, because sometimes, we talk about truth to power as though sometimes it's a bravado thing, or I've learned to hate the phrase. It supposes that truth is a variable and power doesn't want to hear it. In this case, power was right. Right? I was so confident in my representation of my point of view, which, by the way, you must be, because the system requires that everyone plays their role. But when leadership decided we were going to do something else, and I did a cheery aye and said, okay, look what happened. So to me, there's some just really interesting things in it, and lots of lessons learned from mine, from a security perspective. we were way too narrow in how we thought about security. We thought security was physical security, ensuring that standards were met.
Yeah.
We did not at that time think that we were responsible for looking at the security environment in a region. So you see what comes out of that is just a much more aggressive view of how you monitor security situations. But it was one of those moments when what we now see as what needed to start happening is we need to be able to share with the stakeholders who don't happen to be in government the reality of the situation.
Right.
We learned it again with Snowden. We did it with interference in the election. We screwed up our courage and did it when we talked about Russian poisoning Skripal. We did it again with Ukraine.
Masterfully.
But if I go backwards, I think that Benghazi was actually one of the first times that we said, you know what? The reality of the circumstance is not just in the protection of the intelligence equities, but rather a bigger equity at play. And so you have to think differently about how you protect information.
That is fascinating.
It was.
That is absolutely fascinating. That's the moment, that catalytic moment of an entirely different way of thinking about the use of intelligence.
And I don't think we recognized it at the time. It's just I've seen all those others, and if I look back, because it just was so abrupt, right?
Yeah.
And think about it. It was an outsider director who decided we were going to do that. And so, if you know anything about my CIA, we're pretty proud of ourselves and how we view things. But there's so many lessons about leadership, about change, about how you have to respond to circumstance, about playing your role, but accepting that you might not be right and still coming back. You know, people ask me after the fact, would you defend your discipline? Knowing what you know now, would you do the same thing? And I say, yeah, because that's what it required at the time.
Well, and just so as you were speaking, I was reflecting on some of my own experiences in government where I've been the action officer and the political is like, no, we're going to do this. And I'm like, but we can't. The allies are here. But they were right. So there is something to this, the infusion of new ideas, infusion of new perspectives into these discourses. That's actually quite healthy about the system that can shake us out of our comfort zones.
Yeah, I think, I don't know that we were going to talk about this, or I wasn't going to talk about it. You might have been saying, Sue, I've just led you exactly where I wanted to go. But I do think one of the beauties of our system is this combination of politicals that come in with the what, and the institution that, because of time and expertise and that pesky Constitution, are really invested in the how.
Yeah.
And when they come in tension for outcome, it's actually a brilliant thing. The problem is when you get either a stodgy installed base who forget that it's not how we've done things, but what we are doing.
Right.
Right? Because there are other ways to protect equities.
Yep.
Or the politicals that come in and they want to get rid of those who would slow them down, and they just want the outcome so bad they put the thumb on the scale. But man, it works really well when they come into really great tension. And I think time would show that we have come to a good place.
And just how important it is to get uncomfortable and take risks sometimes, too, just to see the art of the possible with leveraging new stakeholders. Or it's
You're exactly right. Like embracing that creative discomfort
and the unknown. Trying something new,
especially in these systems where we're risk averse. We want to pre-game and know the outcomes before we walk into things, and that's just not how the world works. It's not how people work.
And I think it also speaks to how important it is that you have strong leaders and that everyone plays their role.
Yeah.
One of the things that I worry about is that everyone's getting small and quiet because they're afraid of being second-guessed or being held out as having malintent rather than simply being wrong.
Right.
You know, my view is if the worst you do in your life is you make a mistake, you're doing all right. Now you can't make a lot of them, but right. But I do think that this environment we have right now is making leaders smaller. Mm-hmm. And what that means is things don't happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's also one of the other consequences of, I'd say, the circus that surrounded Benghazi, right? Is the Congress allowed it to become a circus, and the politics at the time it just encouraged even greater risk aversion.
It did.
And more force protection for embassies, and just making more fortresses America as our embassy presence. And so it's, on the one hand, you have this moment of radical transparency that affects strategic outcomes well down the line. On the other hand, you have, the embassy in London being fortified. Like, there's probably other good reasons that they had to move, but most of these locations around the world being uncomfortable with having our diplomats and others out and about in the populations. And so,
we could go down the path. I mean, let's. I mean, we could talk about this tension between when how we do things becomes what we think we do. Right.
Yes.
Right. When in fact, if you'll go back to the founder's vision,
right,
you will come up with new solutions. So my favorite thing to do is say, let's for intelligence, because I love intelligence. Oh man, you can tell that I love intelligence. I think it can be the hero of every story. It also means I'm the most judgy about intelligence. So cuts both ways. But what I love to say about intelligence is, let's imagine that 1947 never happened.
Right. That
the National Security Act wasn't written. That we didn't imagine strategic national intelligence until today. Mm-hmm. Would it look the same as it did? And yet the mission is just the same, right? If the mission is what I say it is, which is, of course, which is to know the truth, see beyond the horizon, and allow leaders to act before events dictate, there is nothing passé about that mission.
Right. But
if you built it today, would it look different in a world that knows everything? Right? I think any leader that can think about that is going to be well positioned to notice when modality can change and mission can be better affected.
Wow.
Do you think that your gender as a woman has had an impact on the way you've taken these decisions, the way you've approached these things? If so, why? If not, why not?
Well, don't you think that's a hard question? So,
it's a totally hard question.
So, I have no idea what it's like to not be a woman. so I don't know what is me, and what is shaped by my gender and the consequence of that, in especially the national security community. But here's what I think is probably what I know to be true. For my whole career, I felt less bound by convention. I'll say it differently. I felt responsible to the mission and to the rules surrounding it, but I never felt so bound by convention that it stopped me from doing what I thought needed to be done, either personally. So I made a bunch of decisions. I mean, there's nothing safe about my career. I can tell it now, and it's like, well, of course you did. But when I left my first job, because at the age of 24, I thought that I was being held back in a way that only a 24-year-old can. And so I decided I would take this new job in an entirely different office, because I didn't think I was going anywhere in the other one. And what my office said to me was, I don't know, Sue, we love you here, but you don't have a degree in engineering, and so it probably isn't going to work out for you over there in the Office of Development and Engineering. And I said, so you mean it would be safer for me to stay here? And they're like, kind of. And I said, we'll see you. That was, but so I think I don't think it was simple to do that, but I think both in my choices for myself and how I approached the substance of my work was always less concerned about convention, even though don't come away thinking that I'm some sort of dilettante or not responsible. So, oh my God, I'm responsible to the mission of my women and men that work for me. Yeah. Now, is that in a way, I've always believed that that's one of the great advantages of being a woman. Right? That society almost allows us to make choice. There are other things it disallows.
Right, right.
But when I had children, and if you have children, you know this moment, as soon as they get into school, they're sick every single day, and this is a conversation that every family has. If you're both working outside the home, it's like, what do you have, what do you have?
Oh, God.
Right?
Yep. Oh,
Right?
yeah.
And I was a little senior to Jim, and so I could always trump, because I could say, well, I'm meeting with the director. He's like, shut up. And then I'd come home at 5, but here's the truth. I could call in and say, I've got to stay home with the kids, and everyone would be like, okay.
Yeah.
And if he called in, they'd say, what's wrong with Sue? Right? And and you would think that meant it was, and there are some ways I guess it was could have been more impactful on me, but think about the message that sends to men. And so I think I don't know if I was willing to take those chances because I'm a woman or just because of who I am, but I think I was more allowed to be different.
Interesting.
Wow.
Because I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on the personal note, I'm always fascinated by the story of you actually leaving your career for, I think, 8 years because it was the right thing to do for your family. Can you talk about what led you to that decision? Not to mention how far you went after that.
Yeah, I did have a great second act. So I guess I was right at about 20 years. My children were 13 and 9. My son was 13. My daughter was 9. I'm kind of an in-and-out gal, and I'm kind of a workaholic, or not very smart, so I have to work hard. And so for the first 20 years, I basically cheated time.
Okay.
Especially when I had children. So, because I actually got my first management job on the day I found out I was pregnant with my second child.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I almost turned it down because I'm like, no way. But I thought, you know what? Don't decide ahead of time what you can't do. So the way, oh my God,
Writing that one down.
Right. So but the way I did it, because I'm really passionate about work too. Did I say I loved my job? I would cheat time. And that is, I would come home by the time the kids were home from school, so I'd come home at 6, I'd do homework, or I'd have dinner with them, and then I'd go back to the office from 10 to 2 or 3 in the morning to do the more work that it takes, in part because I was learning a new job every time, a new job, and in part because I just really want to be good at everything I do.
Wow. And
I married a saint. Right.
That helps.
And though he worked for the CIA, he was brilliant and could do his job in a fixed amount of time. Just no one liked him. Brilliant program manager, but and it worked out really well for the longest time. And then one day, my husband was on TDY, and I was selling some icon of the private sector on being on the board of directors of this idea that I was building called InQtel. And my 9-year-old daughter calls me and tells me my 13-year-old son had run away. And so I went home, and luckily J-Man was home, because that's what he would do, right? He's just a home guy. But I read his note, and his note told me that he was misunderstanding the kind of responsibility that we expected of him. In other words, he was taking too much burden on, right? You try and teach your children lessons, but you know that they're kids and you just want them to acquire the, no, he was a little adult. And he was saying, I know I let you down because I got an 89 on a math test. Yeah, no. And so I'm like, and I could see it. If I looked back, I could see how it unfolded. Mommy would come in at 6 o'clock exhausted. I did not have a poker face. I would meet my children. I would say, hey, do you have any homework? They could see in my eyes, please God, say you don't have any homework. And so they were then, particularly J-Man was trying to protect me, and he was starting to make really stupid decisions for his own life. So I walked in and gave 2 weeks notice.
Wow.
Because I know me, I'm in or out. So that's how I decided to leave. We could talk about.
What did you learn on the outside?
Well, one, you learn so many great things on the outside. It was the right decision, and I think this is really important. Part of me feeling like I had freedom of choice in my career carried over into that moment, and that is, I decided what I needed to do. I did not ask for an and, which is, I would like to leave to take care of my children, and would you hold my job for me? Or, and will you guarantee I can come back, or and anything. And I think when you're so clear in your choice, actually organizations will allow that. But let's not be confused. I was scared as all get out because, like so many of us, I thought that what made me cool. Okay, quit laughing. let me have the idea that I was cool. But what made me cool, I thought, was the work, and that all of a sudden, if I left my work, I knew that's what I needed to do, but I was afraid I wouldn't be cool anymore. Never had a moment's regret. Didn't save my son from being an idiot later in life, but he had all the lessons that are taught, so he's an amazing man and father now. Actually, he was amazing then. He was just a boy.
13-year-old boy.
Yeah, he was. But I think the biggest thing I learned were two. One, you are not what you do.
That's a really big one that a lot of folks,
Right.
It takes like some hard knocks to figure that one out.
It is. So if I go all the way back to basketball playing days, I was 3-time captain of the Duke University women's basketball team. You would infer that I was a good basketball player. Nope. Only won 2 letters. I was good enough to play on, I was good enough to be on the team, but no, I never started a game except the pity game. And I talked to a lot of student athletes now, and they said, well, how'd you do that? I said, because your value is not tied to your position.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right? It isn't. We think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? It's playing whatever space you have, play it well. That's what makes you. And so now I was in a different space, and I played it pretty well. Now being a mom and dropping kids off at school and starting nonprofits at one of the schools to raise money for things. But you are who you are.
Wow.
Independent of circumstance. And so don't get sucked into thinking that you will be less just because you're not. But the other thing I learned that really had the greatest benefit was I thought I was one of the cool kids because I went to work from 9 to 5 or 2 in the morning till 2 in the morning. And what I learned when I wasn't there is that the engine of a great society are not the people that go into the work every day, but they're the crossing guards and the school volunteers. And so when I come back now, I have an entirely different view.
How cool.
Of value, right? And so I see mission contribution entirely differently. And I thought I was a decent leader when I left. I was a much better leader of humans. And then the last thing is, I was much more aware of people doing stupid things like I was. And so when I saw women and men working for me that were making choices that were antithetical to sustained happiness or performance, I'd try and have conversations to say, I don't actually require you to give me 16 hours a day.
Right.
Because it's not generally the organization that requires it, it's what's in the person's head and heart.
Right. Well, and I find that when your personal self and your professional self are the same, right? Any setback in your professional life becomes an indictment of your personal self, right? And so there's some really toxic behavior. That's a dark place to be. So having a robust sense of self outside of your profession is, I think, a really helpful, like psychologically helpful for these long game national security careers.
Yeah.
Or maybe any career.
No, I think you're right. I think for as much as people thought I was a workaholic, the truth is that's what I did. It wasn't who I was.
Right.
And so, because as you get older, you give advice.
Yeah.
So I give two pieces of advice. Number one is, especially for these high-charge national security or any high-charge career, you have to have something for yourself. I don't care whether it's family or music or reading or friends or travel or you have to hold on to something for yourself.
Yes.
You really do. I saw a lot with my colleagues at the CIA who were so involved in the war on terror, and it became a commitment of theirs from the best place in their heads and hearts, but the deleterious effects were profound on the individual. And the second is, we talk about work-life balance all the time, and we think it's benefits or time or something. I think work-life balance is feeling fulfilled in everything you do.
Wow.
So when I was leaving, the CIA said, "Hey, Sue, don't leave. We'll give you a part-time job." Well, part-time jobs you should never give me because I'll give you full-time work for part-time pay. So I'm way too clever for that. So you got to know who you are. Right? I'm not everyone who's listening to us.
Right.
You just need to know who you are. But the next thing he said is, okay, here's the deal. We'll give you kind of a nothing job, and you don't even hardly have to do it, except come in every once in a while. I would have hated that more.
Yeah.
Because then the most valuable thing we each have is time.
Right.
To spend time at something that isn't worthwhile. Like, I never begrudged my work, even when I was spending too much time at it. But if I had a nothing job, or if I'd worked for someone who made me feel less or small, man, that balance just isn't there. So I would just encourage people that this work-life balance is real, but don't think of it in terms of quantifiable stuff. Think about it as, are you feeling fulfilled in everything you do?
Right.
And then make a decision about how to make it work.
While we're on the subject of advice, do you have any advice specifically for mothers in this world?
One, for mothers and actually for parents in general. For parents, any decision made for family is a good decision. Period.
Wow.
Without equivocation. Whether that is missing the meeting to go to a game, or because your parents are in the part of their life that they need more support, any decision made for family is a good decision. And every decision has consequence. You will be successful if you recognize that every decision has consequence. Don't let that affect how you make the decision, but do not let that deter you from making the right decision. So parents in general. And for moms, you are so much better than you think you are. Your children are not for a second thinking about what you're not. That isn't the way they think about it. They're thinking about everything you are. For moms at work, I know you'll worry about who's raising my children, whose values will they have. They'll have yours. If I had sent my children loose into this building, didn't tell you who they were, and you bounced into them sometime and had 5-minute conversation, you would know that they were my children. And when my children have been asked, what's it like to have Sue Gordon as your mom? They're like, what are you talking about? She's mom. And then we would devolve into the times when my son was 7 talking with a friend in his room, and I walked by doing something, and he said, my mom's so dumb. And I looked in. So what I would just say is, one, you're so much better. Your children are not judging what you're not. And everything you're giving them, they're getting. Now, they may choose to be independent and let it out at a time according to their own. But no, just have confidence that what you put in, they're getting, and they just love you. And for mothers of small children, nothing you're doing now is ruining their lives. That's coming later.
Buckle up.
So we got exactly. We got a couple more years.
Yeah, none of the stuff you're doing, none of your choices about whether you gave them sugar or stayed,
Too much screen time.
Yeah, none of that's ruining their lives. There's time.
Well, in all seriousness, a big takeaway from every story you told for me is to stop wasting time questioning decisions. Just have that confidence to, there's so many decisions to make, and so don't second guess them. I think mom guilt creeps in sometimes.
I would
too,
say
when you can be
I would say do the work. And I'm not sure that this is true, but it is something I believe. Especially, I never made any decision that involved protecting myself. I never tried to look good or tried to be thought well of or to be successful. I just, in any decision, I tried to make the best decision that was mine to make in that space. And I probably was successful because I not only knew my decision, but the context of the decision. But I think that is true whether you're talking about raising your family or prosecuting a program. Decision is the coin of the realm. It's what impels progress. Learn to make good ones, but don't be afraid once you've done the work to go ahead and pull the trigger and make the decision.
I love that.
Yeah. So to wrap up our conversation, I'd love to get a sense from our guests. You know, Smart Women, Smart Power. What's your definition of, or how do you think about power? Its use. It's how do you define it? How do you think about it? We spoke to truth to power earlier. I don't know if there's any threads there.
Yeah, I think I should have been ready for this. Darn it, curses! Because I might be inarticulate, and I'll kick myself tomorrow morning. I think power is owning whatever space you have. And you know, when you're early in your career, your space is teeny, but own it. You have it. The world is expecting you to do something with it. So own it. Do so with honor, integrity, and purpose that is not small. Right? Just own it, be good at it, use it for good effect, and then try and recognize that whatever you're doing is not really what's being done. It's something bigger. And if you can be responsible to that bigger, at the same time you're responsible to yourself, then you will indeed be powerful.
Wow.
In the best definition of that term.
Sue, thank you for such a wonderful and inspiring conversation today. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us, and this has been amazing.
It's been a romp. You all are the best. Thanks for letting me come and play.
Thank you for coming, Sue. You're the best.